Okay, welcome to Ivory GC. In this episode, we're joined by Tatyana Kleyman, General Counsel at Brightcore Energy, a company at the forefront of building decarbonization through cutting-edge clean energy solutions. Tatyana brings a wealth of experience from work in sustainability, legal strategy, and social impact initiatives. We'll discuss her path from legal practice to leading legal strategy in the clean energy sector, her involvement in gender lens investing, and how she's leveraging her expertise to drive meaningful change in both the corporate and social spheres. Tatyana, welcome to Ivory GC. It's great to have you.
Hi, Brian. Thanks so much for having me.
So let's get started with can you tell us a little bit about Brightcore Energy and what you're doing as on a maybe a day-to-day basis as General Counsel?
Yeah, absolutely. So Brightcore is a clean energy company. We specialize in turnkey efficiency solutions for commercial, industrial, government, and nonprofit property owners. We do this through three business lines. So LED lighting and controls, that's kind of where Brightcore got its start. Commercial and community solar. And then our biggest growth area now is geothermal heating and cooling. Geo is also a vertically integrated business, which means that we can deliver the entire project in-house. So we employ the engineers directly, the geothermal scientists, the drillers, they all work for us. We own our own drill rigs, and we've developed our own proprietary monitoring and control software. So it's kind of a full package. We're based in New York. We have projects across the Northeast and a few beyond that, and about 120 employees here in the United States. We also have a center of excellence in Stockholm, Sweden, which is very exciting. That's where our geothermal scientists work. In terms of our work, the legal department is myself and another lawyer, Ben. He's great. Shout out to Ben. We handle all things legal for the company. So lots and lots of project contracting. Our product is customized, and our customers are typically large and well established. So unfortunately for us, the contracts usually end up being bespoke because we have to take their form and target it to our product. There are a few customers who will accept our forms, and from our perspective, of course, that's much better and more efficient, more streamlined, but it doesn't always happen. We'll work with whatever the customer's preference and needs are. Yeah, Ben's been instrumental in negotiating all those contracts. And then, we work on everything else. So there's governance, corporate transactions, dispute resolution, hopefully not that often, IP, compliance, and we also serve as a partner to other shared services on things like employee matters with HR, marketing, finance, and procurement. In addition to kind of more traditional legal work, we are also responsible for our insurance portfolio and our government policy and incentives program.
Got it. That's great. So can you give us an example of one of the projects or a type of project that Brightcore Energy works on with your customers and what the legal aspects involved in those projects include?
Yeah, sure. So the businesses are different. The three businesses are quite different. Our biggest involvement for legal is in solar and geo. Geo is really a construction project. So it's, I had to learn construction law when I first started. A lot of times, if we are delivering just a geothermal retrofit system, we will work directly with the customer and contract for that. If it's part of a new construction, we will often be a subcontractor to a large CM, a large construction manager. And so there's, kind of a big wheel. There's a lot of players that are involved in constructing and building a new property. And so we're just one of the trade contractors. So there's a lot of legal work kind of trying to coordinate that project. There's a lot of permitting that's typically handled by operations folks, so legal gets involved in that. Zoning issues, property lines, and things like that. We have to, make sure that we're not violating that. There are environmental laws which come into play. Usually we get at that through permitting. So once we get our permitting, we're in compliance with that. Insurance is a big part of it. We have a fantastic insurance broker, but I'm charged with managing the insurance pieces when they don't go as smoothly as they should. Then there's a financing stack that gets put together. That's completely driven by what the customer's needs are. Some of them come to us with financing. Some of them need our help kind of trying to put that together. And that's, sometimes government incentives. We work with a lot of different partners to create those incentive packages. We have local governments that are very good about incentivizing these kinds of systems. So that's some of the legal work involved.
Yeah, and so I'm sure varies, but can you tell us a bit about who your customers are and what brings them to Brightcore?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with a lot of higher ed right now. There's a big trend in big universities to go geothermal. Those are typically driven by actual decarbonization mandates. We do have also large, kind of Fortune 500 clients who also will work with us because that's part of their decarbonization strategy. There are also just for usually it's end of life, like the boilers are the end of the life of their life, and people need to replace their heating and cooling system, and that's a time that makes sense for customers to consider putting in place a totally different kind of geothermal system, totally different kind of system, and they consider geothermal. It does end up being much more and like significantly energy efficient. You have to hear engineers talk about this because it kind of blows your mind, and it's also financially much more efficient over the long term. Over the short term, there's a significant capex expenditure, so that is what may stop some people, but that's a solvable problem. So there are incentives that help with that. There are financing structures that help with that, right? So higher ed, Fortune 500. We also do have a public vertical, so we work with government at every level, state, local, even federal government clients. And we did some multifamily residential as well. That's in geo. In solar, it's a little bit different. We work with mostly commercial clients there, and then sometimes we work with like landlords who lease their roofs to us to do community solar. Community solar is really exciting because it gives access to communities who otherwise would not have the benefit of that technology to the power that's generated from those panels on the corporate roofs. And then in LED lighting, our customers really are mostly local governments because a lot of people have already switched to LED lighting. So we're doing a lot of work in like New York City public schools and police stations in order to upgrade their lighting systems and install controls.
So the customer will come to you, they have a mandate or some incentive to get more sustainable or to decarbonize, and you will help them with product selection, implement, construction, kind of soup to nuts, the project management of it, or do you handle kind of a more narrow piece of the project overall?
Soup to nuts. So that's our business model, turnkey. That ends up being the best kind of project, right? Where the customer engages us. Perhaps they have only just started learning about geothermal. We can do teach-ins. Our engineers do teach-ins just to explain it to them. We will do I'll talk about the three business lines are really different. So let's just talk about geo because, I know we're time limited. We'll do a feasibility study. Does geothermal work on this property? Sometimes the answer is no, just because of geology or other reasons. But for the most part, we can do it in our geography in the Northeast. We can do it. We'll do a feasibility study. We'll do design. We'll drill a test well. After that, typically, then we move on to a full production system, depending on how large the bore field is. And then after that, we do have the software that I mentioned, which is monitoring and control software. And with that, we can also give a performance guarantee. We can advise. We're not tax advisors, but we can advise that we know incentives quite well. We can advise on what incentives could be, and we also have partners for financing, and we can bring financing partners along if necessary. So soup to nuts, we can do it all. Even for new construction, we have made a pitch to just go direct to customer and serve as a mini manager just for that system. It's a little bit more challenging because there's a lot of other things that are going on in that properties, but we can still handle it without without contracting through others. We do have trade partners that we bring along with us sometimes.
Great. And so can you tell us a little about your background? How did you get to Brightcore and where did you start your career, and we go from there?
Yeah, sure. So I was a finance lawyer my whole career. Seemingly traditional path. I was at a big law firm where I worked on private equity, leverage finance. Then I was a global investment bank as a prime brokerage lawyer, and then at a really great trading firm. And then, boom, pivot to a different industry, to startups, or I guess at least that's what it looks like on paper, because I've gotten a few variations of a question like, did you have a midlife crisis and decide to change the world, And it's not what it feels like in my head. I guess in my head, I'm still a political philosophy major, asking, what's the most optimal way to organize society, and how can 8 billion of us live together in some sort of harmony on this little rock hurtling through the space, and how can I help with that, right? Like, what are the tools? So law is a tool. That's why I went to law school. I was like, well, that's a good tool. Let me figure out how to figure that, how to master that. Finance is a tool. That's partially why I became a finance lawyer. Technology, psychology. In my mind, these are all tools that can be used to improve society, or I guess ruin it. So I'm just learning the tools and then trying to apply them in a helpful way. So I was actually most recently before this, I was a crypto lawyer for several years, because I thought, perhaps naively, that digital currency and the underlying blockchain, I don't know how familiar you are with, but
Sure.
Blockchain is the technology underlying crypto, can help answer some of these deep organizational problems, right? Like, it held this promise of broad financial inclusion and distributed rights ownership and disintermediation of traditional bottlenecks, mostly in finance, but even more broadly. And I was really excited about that possibility, and looked at a lot of use cases that were better, I thought, for society. But really, I was working on a speculative financial instrument that was burning through a lot of carbon and mining. So I thought, for me at least, I think there's still a ton of promise in that technology. But for me, I thought working on renewable energy would be a lot more productive from a societal standpoint. So I made what felt to me like a small pivot, but I guess maybe from a resume perspective looks larger.
So how long did you work in a law firm environment, and then how long have you been on the in-house side of things?
I worked at a law firm for 4 years, so then I guess I've been in-house for 14.
Okay. And your likes, dislikes, or compare and contrast your law firm experience with your in-house experience. What did you take from your law firm training, and how have you applied that in the in-house environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think the law firm training is great. I'm very grateful for it. A lot of focus on, first of all, just work ethic, right? I mean, I was able to work 72-hour days. You would have thought they're only 24 hours in a day, but no, when you're a law firm associate, it just kind of keeps going. And just attention to detail, customer service. I think I learned a lot of those things. I did work a little bit before law school, but this was really my first real intense job. And so I think I learned a lot of those fundamental skills there. So thank you, Fried Frank. Also, I learned finance, leverage finance there. So Brightcore did 2 separate credit facilities in the last year. And I was able to, I did use to some extent external counsel, but I was able to do a ton of that in-house because I understood finance well. So I think that really helped. In terms of whether I liked it, I mean, I was ready to leave after 4 years. So I really like being closer to the business. I really, I mentioned law as a tool, right? Like, I think people who are well suited to law firm work, like the practice of law for its own sake. And I did not. And that's beautiful that they do. I think we need lawyers like that who love the practice of law for its own sake. To me, it really was a tool in the service of something else. And I think in-house is just a much better way to do that. And so then you keep asking yourself, in the service of what? And then that's a really important question, right? And so I view myself and my team as we're part of a larger team. The world is not divided into lawyers and non-lawyers, which is kind of what it felt like at a law firm. It's a team of many different kinds of people. There's the operations people and the sales people and the tech people and the engineers, and they're not all the same. They're not all business person and I'm a lawyer, We all contribute differently. We're all members of a team, and we're all looking for one goal, and I have to understand what they're contributing. I have to understand what motivates them, and then I have to ask myself how I'm contributing and how we can build something together. It's a completely different mindset than being at a law firm, and it definitely appeals to me a lot more.
Yeah. How did your experiences with organizations like the Impact Capital Forum shape your perspective on the role of legal counsel in social impact initiatives?
Yeah, Impact Capital Forum. You did your homework. So when I worked at BNP, I was part of a microfinance employee interest group for finance professionals who wanted to have a positive social impact. Microfinance was kind of like all the rage at the time. So this was an independent club. It was actually incubated at Deutsche Bank, but then they wanted to spread more broadly among finance professionals. So they were looking for corporate partners. So I became the BNP liaison to what was then the Microfinance Club, and then I later joined their board. I think I stayed for 5 years or so. So we held events that were basically asking the question in different ways of how finance can be a force for good in the world. And over the years, the specific areas of focus moved from microfinance to sustainable finance, social finance, impact investing, and ESG. That was, you mentioned gender lens. Maybe you saw that somewhere. We did a couple of events on like gender lens investing. So there's different kinds of ways that you can use finance for certain purposes. So that's kind of what we discuss. ESG is different. ESG is just risk, actually a way of company managing their risk. So anyway, we were discussing all these topics. We rebranded the organization to Impact Capital Forum because it more broadly captured the kinds of things we were talking about. The organization was really targeted at financial professionals, not lawyers. But yeah, I mean, it gave me a great exposure to sustainable finance. Actually, I met Brightcore's chief strategy officer there because he was a speaker at one of our ICF events that like maybe 2 or 3 years before I came to work here. So I think that really emphasizes the importance of community in your career journey, because you may be able to build a community right at work, but if that's not where your intellectual home is, you can always get involved with something else, and that can be a great experience in its own right, and also open up new doors like ICF did.
Yeah. So what are some of the unique legal challenges you've encountered in the clean energy sector, particularly with projects like geothermal installations?
Sure. So the first challenge, we talked about the first challenge was I had to become a constructor. I was a finance lawyer and I had to become a construction lawyer. And construction is not like prime brokerage. It is in the sense that there's like a unified theory of everything, or maybe like a unified theory of contracting. But there's a lot of nuances to construction. So there's the subcontracting and subcontracting, which can get like a stacking pyramid, and that's challenging from a legal standpoint. There's things like change orders, mechanics lien, zoning, OSHA, which is occupational safety and health, and permitting. Those are all unique legal issues specifically to geo, since that's what you're asking about. I had to deal with insurance a lot, and I had to learn about government incentives and energy efficient regulations, because so we have, in terms of kind of regulation, there's carrots and there's sticks, right? So the carrots are the incentives, so that's really important. That's how we put together our package, our finance packages for the projects. But then there's also sticks, right? So there's like local law 97 in New York, for example, which requires buildings to be energy efficient. So that may be another thing that incentivizes a customer to come to us. So I had to learn all of that. And since you asked about geo, like, can I talk about this? I know this is a legal podcast, but just geothermal, because I think it's amazing. Yeah, it's in many ways, it's a really simple technology, and it's been around for like thousands of years, right? I think the ancient Romans used it, and like the Qin dynasty, it's the way it works is the temperature underground is steady. So you can harness that temperature to heat a building in the winter and then release heat back into the ground in the summer to cool the building. And, it's been around in the US as well for a while, but it just never scaled. So now we're scaling it. So anyway, what it involves is you're drilling holes into the ground. They're about 500 feet deep, although it depends on the geology. And then you're putting in ground loops, either underneath the building or adjacent to it, so that fluid can circulate through it, right? So then, you're asking about what are the unique legal challenges to that? Well, they're subsurface rights, right? So you may be encroaching on somebody else's property, right? You have to have your permits, both your above ground permits and underground permits. Subsurface is not visible, right? So you could be releasing all kinds of things when you're drilling that into the ground that deep. And then, some of the other things we talked about, like warranties and financing. There's also rules about how, this is actually kind of cool. There's rules about how deep you can drill. And we successfully challenged one of those rules in New York because it was designed for the oil and gas industry. And they have redesigned it now for geothermal. So we were the first ones to drill down 800 feet under Columbia University to drill their test well. So there's regulations like that. And also if you're talking about district systems, which is kind of connecting a lot of buildings, there are new regulations that are just being piloted and written around thermal energy networks that we are watching pretty closely.
Yeah. So how have you picked all this up? What do you leverage outside counsel for? What resources have you used to kind of piece together and come up with just your own skill set? Tell us about how that's evolved over time.
Yeah, I read a lot. I like podcasts. I then ended up on one somehow, but I usually am the listener.
Okay.
I do leverage outside counsel. I haven't figured out how to leverage them in the most optimal way because we have, for this kind of purpose, just because the people who are expert in like tax incentives and even renewable energy development tend to be very large firms and just not cost optimal to use them for learning, although, you know, I have learned from them. So it's just a lot of reading and, you know, kind of pulling it together. I do think we are trained for, I sometimes make fun of legal education, you know, not preparing us to practice law, but I do think we are trained to read a lot of dense material, understand it, and then make connections. So I've been doing a lot of that. And the government, you know, has information or used to have information on its websites that was helpful. There's law firm memos and things like that where you don't necessarily need to pay for advice. So I've been doing a lot of that too.
Nice. And so talking about the regulatory landscape in this space, how do you learn to navigate you know, regulations when implementing innovative energy solutions, particularly in urban settings?
I navigated with a strong cup of coffee. I mean, because there's a lot that's so there's a few, I think maybe there's a few parts to your question. So in urban settings, thank you for asking that, because we are truly unique, particularly in the United States, because a lot of that tech comes from Sweden. We are really unique in being able to drill in urban environments. It is very unusual. People who heard about geothermal in the past imagine that you need like a baseball field, right? Because you need a huge bore field to do that. We can go in surgically. We have a mini rig. We can go in surgically into a building and create, drill, and then install a geothermal system there. In fact, we just drilled in the basement of a fully occupied building on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Our lead engineer tells me that it's the first time it's ever been done, right? Because usually either it's new construction, so nobody's living there, or people, you know, need to move away while the construction is happening. The residents were all there, and they did not seem to be disturbed. We brought in a mini drill rig into the basement, and we drilled those holes, right? But the legal challenges in an urban environment are, you know, those property lines I mentioned, they're a lot closer, right? So you have to be even more careful. Permitting can be really challenging with a whole lot of city agencies, and noise could be, in this particular project that I mentioned, Manhattan, we were very careful about that, so it was not an issue, but, you know, that's urban. If you want to know about kind of policy, I think you asked about, you know, the regulatory landscape more broadly. You know, the biggest moving target right now is at the federal level. So for example, our solar and geo projects benefit significantly from the investment tax credits and the Inflation Reduction Act. And that's going through the budget reconciliation process right now. So we're watching that very closely. But well, first of all, I worked in crypto, so I'm familiar with the regulatory gray areas. So I feel quite confident that I can help the company navigate through that. But, you know, more closely to our business, you know, we take, first of all, in Geo, we take comfort in the fact that the Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, he's a big fan of geothermal. It was actually listed as a key national energy resource in one of the president's executive orders. And there seems to be bipartisan support for extending many of the tax credits in the IRA anyway. So that's, you know, it would impact our solar business as well. You know, we'll see what happens there. Regardless, I believe it's, you know, it's kind of impossible a lot of people are talking about, you know, what's happening in renewable energy. I think it's impossible to stop the momentum because there are significant market forces. And even on the policy front, like holding it back is contrary to the political goals of any administration. It's great on the workforce front. We have a shortage of drillers right now in our industry, but you can retool fairly easily drillers from oil and gas to do geothermal. So that's a potential for a lot of jobs. It's good for national security, energy efficiency, right? I mean, I feel like I'm lobbying you, sorry, but I believe in our business model. So I think we're, despite some of the challenges, I think we're on a good path.
What are some of the parallels that you've seen from the crypto industry and into the geothermal or the clean energy space, particularly as you're navigating some of these gray areas from a regulatory perspective?
Yeah, it's for some reason I ended up being in very visible industries. Like it's just a lot of people talking about it. I think I
Yeah.
want to be in a really boring industry next, something that's like really essential to keep our societies together, but something that is never on the front page cover.
Yeah.
Because it's once you get into headlines, there's just so much turbulence, right? You're like constantly, it's the winds or the headwinds and the tailwinds, and the winds are constantly blowing. And that was happening in crypto, and to some extent it's happening in clean energy because everyone's talking about it. So once everyone's talking about it, your customers start asking a lot of questions, what's going on. They start getting nervous because they're reading the headlines. Your employees could be asking questions, the industry is asking a lot of questions. The regulators, I think, feel a lot of pressure because there's so many eyes on them as well to do something, right? When sometimes the right answer is to, I'm not saying in this, but I'm not expressing an opinion on either crypto or renewable energy policy right now. Sometimes the right answer is to do nothing, right? Or sometimes the right answer is just not what's going to look best on the headlines. So those are the parallels that I'm seeing, and I'm hoping that in either policy area, the regulators can take an approach that's thoughtful and that's really well balances the innovation with protecting society and safety. So I think we'll get there. It's just that regulation takes a long time, and it's just by the nature of what it is, and it's not as fast as innovation. So that's the other thing, is when you're innovating a lot and quickly, regulation has a hard time keeping pace. And so I think that's the other parallel.
When you get those questions from customers, employees, what other stakeholders within the business do you work with to craft a response, and how do you handle those those situations that can be I can imagine pretty tricky?
We have a great, senior management team. So I write it based on what I know, and then I send it around to the rest of the senior management team, and I make sure they're okay with it. And then we put out a unified message. As long as we feel that it's true, like you just have to embrace uncertainty, right? So the challenging thing about uncertainty is you want to be confident, and you want to instill confidence in the market, in all your stakeholders, but you also want to be honest, right? And so you don't want to express more confidence than is appropriate for the reality of the situation. And so I think if we can properly find that balance, then then I think that's how we always want to operate, with kind of high confidence, but high integrity at the same time. And that's how we try to navigate that as best as we can.
You've been involved with mentorship programs like Women in Power and the Cherry Blair Foundation for Women. How have those experiences shaped your approach to leadership and giving back?
Yeah, I was involved with those. So Cherry Blair was really fun. I got to mentor a South African entrepreneur for a year who was building IT infrastructure across Zambia. And honestly, I learned a lot more from her than I think she did for me, which is part of the reason I only did it for a year. But I mean, it was really great. It's a really great program for helping entrepreneurs in developing countries. Women in Power, I actually first joined as a fellow, in large part because I wanted a formal mentor. You hear so much about mentorship and how important it is. And at the time, I thought, gosh, I don't have a mentor. I need to join a program. I think about mentorship differently now, because that was a very rigid understanding, I think, of what a mentor is. Anyone can really be your mentor if you are intentional about learning from other people. Even like that boss or colleague from whom you mostly learn what not to do, that's a kind of mentor too, right? And so I feel like I have a lot of mentors. But nonetheless, like the formal mentorship programs are great, especially if you're the kind of person who's reluctant to ask more senior people for help, which I am or maybe was. So I really enjoyed the WIP fellowship. I was matched with a wonderful mentor who's a CEO of a large cultural organization, and he still is very generous with his time and his great ideas. And so after I finished the program, they invited me to join as a mentor. And I was very happy to do it as an opportunity to give back and, help open up more opportunities for the next generation of leaders.
Within Brightcore, how do you foster a culture of learning and support for junior professionals while also, managing risk and execution?
So first, hire great people, because then they will be your co-creators in a good culture. Make sure they have all the tools they need to do their jobs and clarity on what the job is. Early on when they start, it's not always possible, but it's just, since you're asking about junior employees, briefly, I have them shadow me, and then you flip it and you shadow them, and then you release and you get out of the way. Right. So don't after a certain, period, whatever the appropriate period is for the individual, don't micromanage, but, be aware of what they're working on, get feedback from other people on how they're doing, right? If you're not micromanaging, you want to know how they're working with the rest of the team. Always respect them as humans and professionals and team members. It doesn't matter if they're much younger. That's what they are, right? That's why you hired them. I always try to make sure that my door is open for questions, have frequent check-ins, give quick and specific feedback when necessary in private. Make them feel valued and recognize good performance in public. I'm not perfect at this, and even if I was perfect, it probably still wouldn't always work because people are complicated, but I think these are the basics.
Yeah. And what's something you think more legal leaders should talk about openly? Something that's often left out of GC conversations.
So I would say that GCs talk a lot as it is. I joined a GC group maybe in the last year or so, and I can't even keep up with all their conversations. This particular group is just really thoughtful and helpful and constantly striving to, this is like cross industry, and they're constantly striving to do best for their respective organizations across like a really wide range of challenges. I guess the things that I think can use more attention from our profession, well, there's three things. One is legal education. Because as I mentioned before, I don't think we're really prepared to practice law. Then the business integration. So how does the legal function get integrated with business? And then law firm delivery model. And you're working on that. So thank you. We appreciate, we collectively as a profession appreciate you. I guess, to say a little bit more, like with legal education, we all spent 3 years of post-college life and $300,000 learning just how to read case law. And then most of us who are not litigators never read case law again. And meanwhile, we graduate without a really great idea of how to practice law. So I think that doesn't make sense, right? Both financially and kind of as training. So hopefully somebody fixes that. The other, the integration point is I think lawyers need to understand business really well, and business really needs to understand us really well. And that's also our job. So to understand business, you need to understand products, markets, financial statements, and people. And for business to understand legal, they need to, get the value of a legal and compliance framework that's core to their business. So well, without naming names, I once worked for a company, although it's all over the Financial Times. I once worked for a company that had a very talented trader. And I guess he was not particularly aware of the compliance framework that our company had because there was a different team that handled it. So the trader left the company and started his own business and lost $50 billion, most of that customer money, and is now in jail, right? And so there's a lot of different ways to tell that story. But one of the ways I like to tell that story as a legal and compliance professional is he didn't understand, right? He was very talented in trading, but did not understand the deep value that a robust legal and compliance framework brings to that business. So that's that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean on the law firm front, maybe you're better, you can speak to it better. But like I got a $375,000 bill for one document, on a relatively small project, when I brought almost the rest of the work for that project in house. So, like let's fix that. And I understand why, but I just don't think the answers are good, right? Like we should all collectively as a profession figure out better answers to that,
Yeah.
especially for smaller companies. Like that may be an appropriate bill for, a much larger company.
Yeah, yeah. So if you could design the ideal legal function from scratch in a clean energy startup, what would it look like?
I
I
did.
guess you are doing that.
I did. It would look like mine.
Share what's helped, what's been successful in building the legal function at Brightcore.
Yeah, I shouldn't say I did. That's a little, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. I'm the first full-time general counsel.
Yeah.
There's definitely, I was not starting from zero. First of all, one of our co-CEOs, the one that I report to, is a former lawyer, and I really credit him with a lot with being very thoughtful about the legal structure of Brightcore. They had a part-time kind of general counsel for a little while, who I think also did really great work setting things up. And then they've had law firm partners for many years. I think even from our co-founders are serial entrepreneurs. So I think they've had these law firm partners from even a previous business. And I think they did really, great work for the company all before I got there, right? So what I had to do is really figure out how to build like an in-house function. It's not that there was no legal infrastructure that existed. In terms of what helped, understanding really well what was done before really helped. You really need to know where your starting point is, because you don't want to start from zero if you don't need to. Sometimes you need to, but I didn't really. And just understanding what's really valuable to the company, understanding who the stakeholders are and where we can add value, what solutions we can deliver. What timelines we can deliver them on, and what would be most beneficial. And I think that's always going to continue, right? Because that's a question that I'm asking myself every day, and we're constantly adjusting and pivoting, and I'm thinking about how to right size the team and how to right size our workflow and all of that. And I think that deep integration with the business is what really helps.
Yeah. So to wrap up, what's one piece of advice you'd give to your younger self or to any young attorney considering to move in-house today?
Yeah, I mean, I love this question because I was clueless when I started practice. So I would give my younger self a ton of advice. I think in terms of other people, don't take advice from a person on a podcast, because I you
And
have
any
to
other
kind of,
podcast other than Ivory GC.
other than this one. Okay, since we're on this one, then I have three. Can I do three?
Please.
Okay. So I think the first one is around skills, right? So if you're early on in your career, I would think about building your skill set, and that's a combination of technical skills and soft skills. So your technical legal skills should be broad if you want to kind of striving towards a GC position. So try to get as much exposure as you can. Corporate, M&A, regulatory compliance, contracts, litigation, IP, and employment. Those are the things that come up, I think, cross-industry for a lot of GCs. And then your soft skills, I would say, are equally, if not more important. And you don't need you don't even need a job to practice them. Like practice on your friends, right? So communication, key, super important. Ideally with as many different kinds of people as you can. Emotional intelligence, problem solving, work ethic, adaptability, and just, yeah, I mean, I think if you strive to be like a happy, kind, high integrity person, then people will just naturally want to work with you. I guess that's a skill of sorts. The other, we talked about this a little bit, but is really being part of a team, right? Don't divide. If you, I don't know who we're talking to, but if you're a young lawyer at a law firm thinking about maybe I want to go in house, maybe I want to be a GC, are you dividing the world into lawyers and non-lawyers, or do you really want to be part of a team where the goal is something other than the practice of law, right? The goal is you're creating something and you are just one piece of the puzzle. You are helping them get to that goal. Figure out who the people are. Do you like working in teams? Figure out how to work in teams better and how to respect and understand the other people there. And I would say, maybe the last one is be proactive with your career. I heard someone once say, treat your career like a startup, which I really like. I guess what that means to me is, learn as much as you can, talk to people who are doing things you may be interested in, take some calculated risks and pivots, take on new projects, new opportunities, and just have fun. This job can be really stressful, but it can also be a really great adventure.
One of the things I love about hosting a podcast is I can put myself in the shoes of a junior attorney and take all of those pieces of advice and apply them in my career. It's a lot of really helpful information and an insightful perspective. So thank you for coming on and sharing that. And we wish you all the best and Brightcore all the best in your future path here.
Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate it.